Hi everyone. Hi everyone. Good to see you all today. Welcome to Scimplify 2021. We are shortly going to get started with the fifth session of the day, the PhD journey. This will include a panel discussion with current PhD students across the globe. They will be sharing their journey to and through the graduate school, both ups and downs. So PhD means different things to different people. It's a very unique degree in the sense that although you graduate at the end of it and a degree is conferred, there is no set curriculum. There is no predefined time commitment. Everyone's journey and experience is different. And maybe that's why sometimes it seems somewhat intimidating, especially if you're a first generation graduate or not coming from an academic lineage. At Biologically Speaking, we believe in equitable public dissemination of scientific knowledge. And with Simplify 2021, we are celebrating science for all. So, with that overarching theme in mind, in today's panel discussion, we will try to demystify the PhD and break down how to get started, what to expect, and what the journey entails. So, if you're looking to start a PhD or planning to apply and wondering where to start, or just curious about it, this session is for you. We would love to take questions from you. So, all of you in the audience, please fire away all your queries and concerns in the comment box. We'll try to answer them one by one. I'm also sure our panelists will answer them to the best of their abilities and knowledge. So let me not take up any more time from today's discussion. Let's get started with a short introduction. So I'm Shorodip. I am a fifth year graduate student now in Vanderbilt University, USA, and I am working on DNA replication with Drosophila as a model species. So we can go around with our panelists. I'll start from left to right on my screen. So first one is Shreya. If you can just briefly introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Shreya Pal Chaudhary. I'm currently in my final year, what I hope is my final year of grad school at EPFL in Switzerland. And I'm working in neuroscience, working on basically synaptic mechanisms of emotional learning. And that's all from me.
Thank you, Shreya. Pritish, you are up next.
Hi, I'm Pritish from Israel. I'm studying at the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel. I'm studying neuroscience as well. In particular, I'm working on working memory, both theoretically and experimentally.
Nice. Ankona, you're up next.
Hello, I'm Ankona. I'm here from Bangalore. I'm currently a third year PhD student at Jawaharlal Nehru Center for Advanced Scientific Research, Bangalore. And I'm working on the social and foraging behavior of wild Asian elephants in Kabini, Nagarhole and Bandipur Tiger Reserve.
Thank you. Arun, if you may.
Hiya, I'm Arun. I just completed my fourth year PhD and handed over my thesis here at the University of Edinburgh, UK. So if I manage to defend, if I get a degree, it will be in evolutionary biology, infection and immunology research. So broadly, like through my thesis, I tried to investigate how individuals evolve against infections or withstand infections. And I used Drosophila, the insect system, and their natural pathogens. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. It really sounds so uncertain. Okay, Sharbutanu, you're up next.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sharbutanu. People call me Sharbat. And I just completed my first year in the Sorbonne University in Paris. And I work on motor learning and adaptation using zebrafish as a model. Mostly experiments, a bit of theory and computation as well. So, yeah.
Nice. Tanmana, if you may.
Hi, hello. I'm Tanmana. I am a second year PhD student at a Cornell University program. So I'm in the immunology program of Weill Cornell Medicine, which is a partnership program between Cornell and Memorial Sloan Kettering and a hospital for special surgery. I'm currently interested in T-cell immunology in cancer. And well, I'm a fresh graduate student, just joined the PhD lab, and I would like to share my experience with you all. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you for being here, Tanmana. Upala?
Hi, everyone. I'm Upala. and I'm a second-year graduate student at NTHU, Taiwan. My department is chemical sciences, and my research mainly focuses on clinical applications of modified chemical compounds. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you, Srijan.
Hi everyone, I'm a third year grad student here at Ashoka University, India. I work in the evolutionary immunology lab. So what I work on is that I am trying to understand how hosts evolve immune responses when there are multiple infections using flower beetles as my model organism.
That is great to hear. In fact, the lab beside my lab also works on a similar thing. But not to get into the weeds of research, I think we'll need to start talking about our journeys. So I think we can begin with something very simple. I think, as it is said, that every great superhero has a great origin story. I think that's where I'd like to start. Like, how did you get started on this journey of PhD? Because my essentially my journey in research was very, serendipitously seen. My father saw an advertisement for a summer project in JNCSR, and that's how I actually I applied and I got into it. It was called Project Oriented Biological Education. So that was a 3-year long summer project every year for 2 months. So I think that was my first dabbling into science. But how about you guys? Like, what actually drawn you to science and then PhD? Anybody can chime in. So just feel free to take it away.
Okay, I'll start since nobody else is. So
Yes,
for me, it was kind of like, I would say I was just exploring things in somewhat different areas as well. So I didn't start doing experiments where I put fish into agar and then looking at them. I started doing engineering, sounds very stereotypical, but yeah, computer science. And I also happened to get an opportunity to do a summer research program, like you mentioned, Shorudeep. And this was already, I was very happy. It was in EPFL, and it was in a lab which was somewhat what I was doing in computer science, but also neuroscience. So it's computational neuroscience, where people try to, it's a field where you try to look at how computations occur in circuits, which it's a simulation-based thing. And I thought I liked that. I still do. And so then I continued. I went for a master's at the same university, and then decided that I wanted to see more of what actual living beings do this and not code. And I tried to look for opportunities where people would pay me to do this. And took some time, but found a lab which would. So it's been traveling a bit through a few disciplines, but finally finding a way where I would basically get an opportunity to look at living beings doing stuff.
That's a great travel story from computer science to biology, especially neuroscience. We actually have a session on that as part of Scimplify. We will be hearing from faculties who have joined bioscience from different backgrounds. We call it All Roads Lead to Biology. But I mean, I'm sure you all will join for that as well. But I just couldn't resist myself from asking a follow-up question. So how was the journey? Like, did you find it especially difficult, or do you find certain advantages over people who are coming from a more traditional biology background?
Both in a way, like some labs really like it if somebody's from a different background. I've worked as a research assistant in a couple of labs before coming to my current position, where you are kind of already expected that, okay, so you have a computer science background, so I'm pretty sure you can do these, as a, I don't like, what was the term that a lot of engineers like to use, like code monkeys, where can you build this thing for us quickly, which is, I think, a very important skill in a lot of, especially neuroscience experimental work. But so it's a useful skill, but sometimes it's important to make yourself understood that, look, this is a good thing. This is my background. I know this, but I also want to do other stuff, like real wet lab things, if that interests you. If it interests you to do it and you are clear about what you want to do, then I think a diverse background really helps, because you have a more set of skills that you can utilize. If it doesn't, if you're not assertive enough, sometimes you cannot maybe do what you want to do. So that's, if there's an advice, yeah, be a bit assertive about things you want to do, even if you come from a background where you think you're not accepted.
Nice. Okay, so has anyone else also joined bioscience from any other discipline, or everybody has, except Sharbutanu has a background in biology? I mean, we can talk about it a little bit if anyone else has. Probably not. Okay,
No.
I'm feeling that. Yeah. Yeah, okay. So I guess more specifically then, I'd like to ask all of you like about how you get started on your PhD journey and how did you choose your graduate program. I guess we heard a little bit about from Sharbutun and how he transitioned from different labs. So if anyone else want to share their journey about how they chose their current lab and what was their like criteria to choose the lab, like what were they looking for and how did they decide to join the lab finally? Yes, I think Shreya can take.
Yeah,
Sure.
I think for me, it was an amalgamation of a few decisions. So after I'd done my master's project, and actually in the institution where I was, it was a 2-year master's project. So it was really like proper lab work. And I'd realized already that this is the kind of research, or experimental neuroscience is really what I wanted to do. So I was very clear on that. But I wanted a bit more of lab experience before I jumped into my PhD. So I had 2 other project positions that I did in neurosciences in India already. And where I also did, I wouldn't say I did a bit of computational stuff. I got exposure to a bit of computational stuff because it was a lab where theory and experimentation went hand in hand. So coming from that perspective, I was very sure I didn't want to end up in a PhD where I wanted to do lab rotations, because I was very sure of what I wanted to do. So in that sense, the US was a bit not for me, because I'd done my master's in sort of neuroscience. I'd done a lot of neuroscience lab work. So I didn't really want to explore and find my way through lab rotations. So coming from that perspective, I was very clear on what style of research I wanted to jump into and which kind of labs I would apply to. And so that's why I applied to Europe and Switzerland in particular, because it sort of has this, how should I put it? Like, it's different from Europe, the PhD style, and it's different from the US. It's sort of the best of both worlds, I have to say. And so here, that's where I am.
Of course. Is there anyone else who doesn't think that he's having, or he's or she's not having the best of both worlds? But yeah, I mean, that you bring up a very interesting point. So lab rotation. So that's very typical of US PhD curriculum. I'm sure it also happens in other places as well, in India and other countries. In US specifically, because a lot of people join directly from their bachelor's after a 4-year degree, they can, like, they're probably still exploring their research interests, and that's why to help them we have kind of lab rotation things where you rotate through 3 or 4 labs to find out what kind of research you like the most or what kind of people you like to work with most. So if anyone else has experience with lab rotation, we would love to hear that. Has anyone rotated in the labs?
Actually, I'd like to talk about it a bit. So I actually, when I got to Israel to Weizmann Institute, I joined as a master's student. And Israel has this, so essentially the way our program works is most people, like after you finish your bachelor's, you join as a master's student, but they run the program as if it were an integrated PhD program. So essentially you join as a master's student and you do rotations, you do like a master's thesis, and essentially you get like a free pass into joining for a PhD as long as some advisor is happy to take you. And in this way, actually, initially when I started out here, I had already been working in neuroscience for a year and a half, almost 2 years, in and out. And I had this conviction that I kind of knew what I wanted to do. I was actually quite sure what I wanted to do. And I was honestly like a bit annoyed that I have to do all these rotations. I also had like similar ideas. Like I wanted to do like Sharbatanu, like I wanted to do something more computational, theoretical in neuroscience. So when I showed up for rotations, I was like, okay, I kind of know that I want to do this. So I have like this 9 months of rotations that I basically have to power through. So I might as well do something interesting that is like a bit far away from what I think I want. So actually I did all my rotations in experimental labs. I didn't do a theory rotation at all. And essentially during these rotations, I actually got more real exposure to the other kind of things in neuroscience that I knew about but hadn't myself tried. And I realized, okay, I actually like some of these things, and it took me a while to understand. Okay, it's not like just because I thought I knew what I wanted, it wasn't that, and I just didn't have enough exposure. And having these lab rotations really helped me understand. Okay, this is the kind of thing that I really want. And the other thing I also learned about each lab, what kind of style the PI has, what kind of style the lab group works in, whether it's a very individualistic lab where you're on your own, you have your own project, or they work in teams, whether your advisor is very hands-on and like talks to you every morning and every afternoon, or he's very hands-off and you meet once in a month and that's it. And these things like seem not so important, but they tend to like make a big difference in your life and as a graduate student. And how depending on what style you prefer, you might end up being very happy or very unhappy in one or the other. If you're somebody who prefers to be hands off and independent, and you have an advisor who like meets you every 5 hours, this is going to be annoying for 5 years. And these kind of things I got to learn during my rotation. So I think that was like a really good experience. And in the end, so essentially, this is something that I basically, because I asked for it, I managed to get it, which is I wanted to do something between theory and experiments. So essentially, I had like this very long negotiation conversations with multiple advisors to essentially find a project which works for everybody, which has a part experiments, part theory, and like with so that I can have two advisors, one is experimental and one is theoretical, and to make this all work. So there are options like this that in the beginning you will not necessarily see in advance, or maybe you might know, but you might not know how to get to it. And at least for me, it was possible that especially because of rotations and having all this time to be able to interact in person, you can really craft something for yourself. And yeah, I think this is what I wanted to say.
No, you do really bring up some of the great points. Like when deciding your PhD lab, yes, it matters a lot, like how you interact with your PI and what is the working model for the lab and working environment of the lab. It's none of the model is either right or wrong. There's nothing like that. It just fits someone better. So I think that's a great segue to our next question, I guess. So when you are choosing the lab, how are you, like, what are your key priorities for choosing a lab? If anyone who has not joined in the conversation could join. Yeah, Ankara, yeah.
Yeah, so I also have a little bit variation in how I came in, and choosing the lab is not very pre-planned and decided according to what research interest is. It was also very serendipitous for me because I did not know in the beginning that I will be doing a PhD. So it's solely a stepwise process at every stage, beginning from my bachelor's. And I knew that like a broad general interest in what area I have began in my bachelor's time. And I got the exposure of research institutes and research labs post that during my bachelor's while searching for wildlife biology MSc degree program. And then I applied for the JGPL's exam, a few institutes in India where you have MSc biology. So NCBS was one of the places where you had MSc in wildlife, apart from WII and few more universities. That's when I got an exposure coming out of Calcutta to see that there are research institutes where you have labs and people working properly in the field of ecology, especially. So I knew I wanted to work in ecology. So choosing a lab at that point of time was not something I had in my mind. If from bachelor's onwards, I got an exposure to PIs, people who are working in the field, with whom I started being in contact with. The first thing I did post bachelor's was trying to get a fellowship. So net exam is what you can give here in India from first year of master's itself. And even though I got admission in a university in Calcutta, Baligan Science College for zoology masters, I was applying for the net examination and got the CSIR fellowship in the first year. So with that, now you can, after looking through different places and depending on what kind of interest you have, if you have a certain amount of contact with different PIs, research scientists working in the area, you get an idea of who all are working in your country on certain topics. So post my master's, I then, using the CSIR fellowship, was working as a JRF at NCBS for a certain amount of time. And then again, it was a serendipitous happening where I came to GNC, not as a PhD student, but began as an R&D post my JRF stint at NCBS. And I was still not sure of doing a PhD, but then this work that I'm doing right now on elephants is a very interesting field, biology, that most people don't even know of in India, that you have such kind of field, ecology and animal behaviors, long-term experiments going on in India. So it's an opportunity that came across me, and I took the opportunity. I applied for a PhD position in JNC after that and joined here. So my experience till now has been just going with the flow at each and every step, from bachelor's to master's onwards, trying to get an experience at each of the stages with different opportunities you get, because I also feel that not everything happens according to the way you plan. You sometimes get opportunities randomly. It's how you make the best use of what opportunities you're getting, and at the end of the day, how much you're learning. So yeah, no lab rotations for me. I just finally came into wherever I am.
No, that's great to know. Thank you for sharing your experience, because I'm sure everybody's, as I mentioned in the beginning, everybody's experience is different, and that's why we're trying to get people from different fields, different countries, to know as much as we know. I mean, I'm sure even our combined experience doesn't cover all the whole gamut of PhD journeys. So we have a new panelist joining us, Harshita Kaul, from all the way from Germany. So to not break the flow, just a little bit of introduction from her would be great. So Harshita, if you don't mind introducing yourself a little bit.
Yes. Hi, a very warm afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're joining from. This is Harshita. I am a third year graduate school student with CCAD in Cologne, Germany. I'm a part of the Max Planck Institute of Aging and the Cologne Graduate School of Aging. And of course, I hail from India. I have my roots there. I did my bachelor's and master's from there. And currently I am pursuing my PhD in the field of metabolism, obesity, diabetes, and using the lens of mitochondria. That's a very brief introduction about me. And I think with this, we can proceed with the ongoing discussion, right?
Yes, absolutely. Ankara brought up really some interesting points about the journey of PhD. I'll get on that. Before that, I'd really like to take a question from our audience. So I think we have a question from Shanchari Gorai. I think she has an apprehension that probably a lot of students of current generation has. So she's saying, well, we, the COVID victims, as academics exposures, lost opportunity to get exposure of laboratory, to do any internships, some hands-on experience. As a student, I'm very fond of going through researches. So will this situation affect our academic career in future? Will there be any chance to tag as COVID students? I think this is a very real right now, especially where you have still the practices like the protection against COVID practices in place, where you're still maintaining social distancing and the academic institutions are not still open. So what do you guys think? I don't think we have a definitive answer to that, but still, what do you guys think? Yeah, Srijan, go ahead.
I think, I mean, obviously the students, even my juniors who are who have faced this situation, they're all skeptical and apprehensive of this. But I guess if there are opportunities now as well, if currently they are in India and in some institutes, they can actually write to the PIs if they're interested, and then can see what type of research experience they can get in 1 month or 2 months. I'm saying this because this is something which I had done. So I didn't like when I came to this particular lab where I'm working in currently, I had the opportunity to work here as a research intern for 3 months before finally deciding to join the lab as a PhD student. So I think if they are interested, they can look for opportunities even in the cities where they are, since labs are opening. Like it's good to have a pre-exposure for 1 month or 2 months just to get an idea of what they want to do for the next 3, 4, 5 years. So that actually helps, even if they are not exactly in that particular lab or they don't want to join the lab, but they can at least get idea of the field, the types of experiments that the field requires.
Thank you, Srijan, for sharing that. I think the next thing that I really wanted to talk about, which is I think a very big point of contention, especially during the PhD journey, is the fellowship. So I think Ankara mentioned one sort of fellowship, CSI, JRF, and I'll go to everyone about this because we need to know the funding conditions in different countries. But we also have a question, so let's answer the question first, and then we can go to different people. So Sandhya Kasi is asking, how much of the responsibility of securing funding is the responsibility of doctoral students in a US setup? Should that be criteria while choosing a lab? So since this is a country-specific question, I think Tanmana is from US. So if you can just quickly let us know what is your funding situation, what do you think typically is the in US?
I think it is very different and a very school-specific thing. I am lucky to be in a program where it is not my headache. So every student who gets in gets paid by the school. You don't have to do any research assistantship or teaching assistantship. You just get paid. So I'm just in a very secure funding situation. But I know other schools in USA where you need to have a funding. For example, specifically schools such as UC schools, University of California school, where they appreciate if you have a secure funding, they would take you into the lab. And there are schools like Virginia Tech and SUNY where they ask you to do teaching assistantships and research assistantships, so that pays your stipend. But however, you can also, you have to do your own research specific to what kind of school you want to get in. And since in the US, there are so many funding opportunities, but we have very limited funding opportunities to apply to because we are not citizens of this country. So I think you have to actively find if you actually want to find a funding outside of your school. But there are a lot of schools where they would just secure your funding, and I think that would be very if you actively search for it, you can also get into such schools which would keep you sane throughout your journey.
Yes, that's a great answer. And just to reiterate what Tanmana has been saying, I think in US, if you get accepted in a PhD program, you typically are taken care of, especially as an international student. Yes, there will be a less percentage of international students getting admitted to doctoral programs compared to the citizens, but most likely your scholarship is secured either through your PI's grant or through teaching assistantships or research assistantships or something. That's probably not the case for masters. There are few few scholarships available, but other than that, masters you need to secure scholarships and different types of funding sources, but not for PhD. So for most cases, your funding is mostly secured if you are getting accepted to a doctoral program. But with that, we heard about US. What about Taiwan? Upala, do you want to add how does the funding work in your country?
Yeah, in Taiwan, the scholarship and the funding system is pretty different. Like either you can apply for government scholarship or you can get the scholarship from your school if you're an international student. And in Taiwan, you are also getting paid by your advisor, but the amount of the money your advisor pays you, it varies with different professors. But you get both your scholarship and salary. And the scholarship is like scholarship can be extended for 4 years depending upon your CGPA, publications and qualifiers, everything. Other than that, teaching assistantship, some departments requires it and some department does not provide a teaching assistantship. And if you do a teaching assistantship, you get paid more. But other than that, you can get always your scholarship and the salary from your advisor. Yeah.
Interesting. Everyone, Arun, if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, sorry, I want to sorry.
Yes. No worries.
One thing about the timeline I forgot to mention, not to scare you, but US training is a little more time commitment than other countries. So first years you do courses and then you do lab rotations. And not to scare you, they give you the initial F1 they give you is for 7 years for your PhD. So they expect you to graduate in 6-7 years, which is normal for biology students. And for timeline, I think pros and cons of it, they're going to take care of you for the whole time you're here.
Great to hear. Yeah. All right, Arun, you were saying.
It works slightly differently in UK. I mean, it totally depends. Like when you approach a particular supervisor, you will have an options to apply like government funded or some of the charitable body trusts through trust, for example, the Commonwealth, which is, I mean, all of these are, of course, pretty competitive. And then depending on the program through which you enter a particular graduate school, you would have an option for both rotations or not. So it's totally depends on that particular program. But one good thing right now is most of these funding bodies or funding agencies, they're going global. For example, for Wellcome Trust, right now it's like any nationalities can apply, which wasn't the case few years back, even for Marie Curie as well. So you do have quite a few options now when compared to like what we had earlier. So yeah.
You bring up a great point.
They basically say right now, like it doesn't matter where you're from, but like what you're like going to do, or so that's something to which is
as we like to call it, the most universal language of the world is science. Harshita, you want to add something? How is the funding scheme works in Germany or in Europe?
Yes, sure. So I think there are different modes of funding here. You can apply to graduate schools, and then the graduate schools are the ones that are responsible for your funding. The typical funding period for a European PhD is 3 to 4 years. That's how long the graduate schools per se agree to support you. And anything that goes over and above that has to be a mutual decision between you and your supervisor. Alternatively, a lot of like around 60% of European supervisors do not belong to particular graduate schools, and they have their own sources of funding, in terms of either private or public funding sources. So a lot of times you can also write directly to the professors and then they secure a funding for you. A lot of times what you can also do is you write to the supervisor about the fact that you're interested in their work, and then they interview you. If they are ready to take you in, you join their lab, and after joining their lab, you apply to a graduate school. This also works, and then you get their letter of recommendation, so it definitely supports you further in your application to the graduate school. So I think all of these models kind of work for European PhDs, but I completely understand the concerns that people have for the funding scenario in science. But I always ask people, and especially the people who are embarking on their journey of science, to take a little step back, be honest with themselves, and first of all, ask what exactly is the kind of experience that you want out of the PhD. Yeah, because most of the times, if you apply abroad for PhD, your funding is taken care of. You need to ask yourself slightly larger questions about what exactly is important for you, whether you would like to continue in academics, whether you're looking for a personal professional life balance, and if you have other constraints, etc., etc. And I think depending on this, you should choose where you do your PhD from, and then the funding follows. So I think as a PhD student, as a prospect applicant to a graduate school, worrying about funding should be last on your priority list, because most of the times it's taken care of. That's all I would like to say.
Very nicely put, Harshita. Very nicely put. Yeah, I'm gonna go to Shreya, but I just wanted to add, like, the model of how you describe most of the European PhDs work, like you can get accepted in a lab first and then apply to the graduate school. That's probably near to impossible in the US as an international student, but that's the interesting part, like how different cultures are in different countries. All right, Shreya, the stage is yours.
Yeah, I think this is exactly what I'd like to differ on, because not all European PhDs work in the same way. This is what I actually meant by Switzerland is the best of both worlds, and the case that you have to apply through a graduate program. PhDs are not 3-4 years long. They can be up to 6 years long, and this is usually the case in biology. As we all know, it always takes longer. Funding is guaranteed if you get through. So it's two processes. So when you apply, you can talk to the lab beforehand, but that does not seal anything. Because if they like you, what they will tell you is, sure, apply to the graduate program. And this is a two-step process. So you have to get accepted by the graduate school, as well as the PI needs to like you. So it's a double interview process, and both of these need to be ticked off. It doesn't mean that if the graduate school likes you, but there's no PI that wants to take you, that you're admitted. So it means that you can wait a year, because your application is still valid for a year. But if there is no vacancy in any of the labs, then it just lapses after a year. So that's one thing. And the second is, yes, the funding is taken care of by the graduate school, no matter if the PI has funding or not. If the PI doesn't have funding beyond the 4 years, of course, the graduate school will take care of you. There is no question about that. The other thing that differs from a European PhD is that teaching is mandatory. You have to teach, and it's a huge part of the workload. And there is coursework. It's just not restricted to the first 2 years as in the US. So it's really an amalgamation of the two, but the only good part is that your funding is really secure, and yeah, it's a bit more relaxed probably. I mean, you could finish in 4 years if you wanted to, but that's the ideal scenario. So that's
very interesting to know, because I was just gonna add that it's so different in US, and like teaching is not mandatory. It differs. Like, I can speak from my experience. Like, it differs by the department. Like, not even all the departments in the same university will have the same teaching requirements. Like, some department might, which are like more academic disciplines, they might require you to teach, like my department. But other programs which are more specifically designed towards, being research oriented, they might not require to teach. I mean, you can always contribute to teaching if that's your interest.
Yeah.
But
just a small point I forgot to mention, but your salary is not tied to your teaching. So that's, I think, something different as well. It's mandatory to teach, but no matter whether you teach for a semester or not, your salary remains the same. So again, a bit more relaxing in that sense.
Okay, Sharbutanu, and then we'll go to
I just wanted to say, it's kind of Harshita already mentioned what's happening in Germany, and it's kind of the same in France. And I think I can also speak a bit about Southern Europe as well. Not too many people go there, but it's similar in the sense that you usually, it's for 3 years. That's the normal thing. The funding opportunities are also usually 3 years, but a 4th year is sort of, everybody does a 4th year, and your boss or somebody gets a funding for that. The difference in France is that usually very recently they have things like graduate schools. I am part of a graduate school of physics, so my degree is in physics, although it's a biology lab, but they do not usually fund you. Your funding sources are different. It can be from your professor's big grant. It can be from a scholarship. It can be from, my case, it's a European Union Marie Curie grant. So, and that's guaranteed for the number of years that the grant lasts for, or the funding thing lasts for. For me, it's actually also important the how you're living, because I also want to be able to live a bit comfortably while I'm doing my PhD and not continue, because I did my master's where Shreya is right now in Lausanne, and as a poor student, it's not easy to live in a place like that. PhDs get paid, masters don't. I mean, you can work. I did work partially to do that. In that sense, in France and Germany and other places as well, there is a minimum amount you get paid so that you can live and eat and not die as a PhD student. But you should also look at what funding opportunities exist. If they cover everything, like I'm sure Arun can speak about it. I think he will after this. But in England, it's different in Scotland. I know the tuition fees. In England, it's pretty high. Or usually funding opportunities, funding bodies cover it, but not all parts of it. So make sure you know what you're signing up for. I do know that even last 2 years ago, Nottingham, Bristol, these are okay, but in London, they would not cover all of your tuition fees, which you have to pay out of your pockets, and it used to be high. That's not the case in Germany, France, Spain, Italy, where the tuition fees are really, really low, either covered, or even if you pay out of your pockets, it's nothing. It's like 500 a year or something like that. I think it's gone to 1,000 now in EPFL, but yeah. So
that's very interesting. That's very interesting. And again, like US is so diverse, and that diversity reflects in their academic programs as well. Like it could be one way or the other with any university. Like they might require you to pay tuition fees, or they completely choose to not have you pay anything. But Arun, if you wanna join in the
I mean,
conversation.
that's something which I wanted to bring as well, the funding. So as Shriyadi said, like securing a graduate position does not necessarily mean that your funding is also like secured here in UK as well, at least. So sometimes, I mean, most of the times when you apply for the university, you also need to apply, like have another application for the funding bodies. So, and that should simultaneously go. And then you obviously, I mean, they are linked in a way, but then you still need to apply separately and go through the process. And then you need to have an unconditional offer letter in order to, secure the funding. So there are these factors which come into the picture. And yes, tuition fees is pretty high here in UK. I mean, even in Scotland as well, it's too high. So you please be careful when you're applying for a funding body or a funding agency, and make sure it covers the tuition fees, because in some cases it doesn't, especially the government funded ones, for example, in lakhs fellowships and all these things, they may or may not. So just go through the so that's one thing.
Thank you for bringing that up. We're just gonna slightly change gear and take up one question from the audience, which is admittedly slightly different question. Why should one do a time-consuming PhD than postdoc at a first place? What might drive you into this? This is more philosophical, but yeah, that's a very important question nonetheless. What do you guys think?
Motivation is very important if you're toiling through this. I might reach out to a very small cohort, but for me, as a kid, when people ask me what I wanted to be, I would always say I wanted to be a researcher or I wanted to be a scientist, and I would never say anything else. And my favorite spot as a 5-year-old, 6-year-old was to go into BITM, and I was so excited going there, learning little things, and I think I was always curious. And then even if it pays you less than most jobs, and it takes a lot of time and energy, and the most important part is if you really want to do it, and only then I think you can be happy about it. So I'm very happy about my choice, but again, it might reach to a very small cohort who actually felt like that as a kid.
That's excellent to put. Anyone else?
I want to add something here. I think as youngsters, we only think of PhD as another degree after we are doing a bachelor's and post-graduation. But I think that in itself, from the beginning, is a very wrong way to think of PhD. PhD is not just a degree. People who are pursuing a PhD will have to have a lot of patience in order to invest that much time and sustain your energy and motivation throughout the process. So if you begin with thinking that it's just another degree that you have to obtain after a certain period of time, it will be difficult. You genuinely need to have interest in what you're working on or studying. Only then can you like enjoy the process as well. Otherwise, it will not be an enjoying process at the end of the day. So before heading into a PhD, you should think and decide whether you really want to do it and if you're genuinely interested in what you're studying uh, at all or not. Only then should you join a PhD. It's something I would suggest people.
Very true, very true. Shreya?
Yeah, I think the only test is if you're willing to accept failure on a daily basis and yet you wake up the next morning and think, okay, this is a new day. I'm going to go at it, give it my best. That's the only way you know if you're going to, want to do a PhD. I think that's the only question you need to ask yourself.
Thank you. I think I'm going to take another question from our crowd. So Shonok is asking, how is the mentor-mentee relationship during grad school and how important is that for future career options? I'm just going to slightly broaden that question to include your experience through the grad school, not just the mentor-mentee relationship, but also your experience with dealing with mental health issues and how generally work-life balance works in PhD, if there is anything. So yeah, if anybody wants to chime in.
Maybe I could jump in and share my perspective and my experience. So I had a 3 years rigorous masters by research course from TIFR. And I got introduced to the research culture and lab culture there for the first time. I'm not so sure if it was accurate or not, but then it did give me a flavor of what is the kind of relationship between a supervisor and a mentee, what are the dynamics that play a role. And what I experience here in Germany, in Europe right now is quite the contrast. And what I will tell you now is what I learned from both. I think your relationship with your supervisor is like a marriage. You are locked in for a few years for sure, and you probably have to make it work no matter what. If you move apart, it's your own loss, and then it comes with its own costs. However, it's always an option to take a stance for yourself, right? Now, knowing that you're entering into an arranged marriage or a love marriage, you have to remember a few points, like in any other relationship. I think honesty is very important because you need to be honest to yourself about what you're feeling, and you need to be able to honestly and compassionately communicate it to your supervisor. Because I have seen that a lot of students, they keep building up pressure and they keep building up frustration. And then all of a sudden it comes out as an avalanche, which either leads to a very bad confrontation with the supervisor that spoils things for good, and or it leads to a huge depressive phase which the students struggle to come out of. So I think we have to actively prevent this buildup of frustration, and we have to talk to the supervisors about how and what we feel. So honesty goes a long way. Second is having clear boundaries between personal and professional lives. And this was the point of difference that I felt between my experience in India and here in Europe. I was naive and inexperienced, straight out of bachelor's put into a frying pan. So I was not able to well define for myself the boundaries. And for a long time, I thought maybe I don't need boundaries because I have to go all into the mentorship and get mentored because I am over to the mentor, right? But this is where you need to mature and realize that it is you who has to drive your path. They are just there to guide you, and it is your decision at the end of the day to choose or to go by what they say and what they don't. And a lot of time this boundary between the personal and professional life gets blurry. So you will come across times when you will be commented upon, you will be misunderstood. And what I can just say is that you have to hang in there, and you have to have faith in yourself and continue doing good work, or at least continue putting in efforts without deviating from your center, without losing your groundedness. And luckily, currently, my lab environment allows me to have those boundaries. There is a very clear-cut distinction. We do share a personal relationship as well, but we know where the boundaries are and we don't cross it. So I think setting these boundaries is very important. You need to have an individual life. You need to have an independent voice. And a lot of times I feel that the graduate students, they go through a phase where they lose their voice. Of course, they find it all over again. But that phase where they go into a point of self-doubt, where they think that, oh, if I, take out some time for my personal life, it's not good. I'll be judged upon, I'll be talked about. You should try very hard to strengthen yourself internally and spiritually, not to go into that phase. And this is something that I would really emphasize on. And I think once you take care of all of this, and once you strengthen your core, there is nothing that can move you, and everything else, like any other relationship, can be worked out. So this would be my kind of suggestion.
Very, very nicely put, very succinct and very nicely put, Harshita. Thank you for sharing your experience. Yes, Srijan?
Harshita has actually like mentioned it very nicely. So I just wanted to reiterate that, like, at the very beginning of your study, like when you're starting off your PhD or even during lab rotations, if you can clearly talk to your PI or your mentor that these are the things, or this is how my work-life balance I would look at it, and that actually helps. The mentor also knows that, okay, these are the things which he wants or she wants, and also you also know. That actually helps at the very beginning, rather than going into the PhD after 1 year you start thinking about this. Think it at the very beginning and talk very honestly with your mentor. That actually helps a lot.
That's great point again. I am going to go to Sharbutanu in a minute because I think he wants to answer a question in the chat box. But before going that, should we, Abhishek Sharukan is asking, should we choose integrated PhD or go through conventional way, specifically for ecology and evolutionary biology? So if anyone with that background wants to comment on that.
So I can say that I'm in that background, but for India. So if I don't know if he's asking about Indian PhD program, but at least here, from what I would suggest, the only difference from what you choose among in between integrated PhD or just a PhD program is that with the coursework that you have to complete in the beginning few years in integrated PhD, you tend to have a few more years remaining for research work as opposed to PhD. The time period will be shortened in a PhD program because you still have to give at least a year and a half for finishing up your coursework, and then your remaining time is only 3 to 3.5 years to wrap up the research and data collection. For integrated PhD, it relaxes a bit. You already have a year or two extra. So that helps. Otherwise, I don't think there is a big difference. The only difference could also be if you don't have any research exposure at all in bachelor's, you can and if you jump into an integrated PhD program suddenly, it might be overwhelming in the beginning. It's better to take some time before joining in a PhD program to gain experience, have some interaction and exposure into how research work is happening, especially in terms of field work. If you're wanting to do ecology and evolutionary biology, spend some time in the field, see if that suits you, and then decide doing a PhD. Those, I think, should be considered. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I think in the interest of time, this is the last question I'm going to take, which is from Karthik Srinivasan. I have seen Indian students worry about the administrative and ordering work on a frequent basis apart from the doctoral work. How is the situation in first world countries with regard to this? If Sharutan wants to answer that.
Yeah, actually, I had raised my hand for the previous thing, but it also ties up with this, to be honest. But no, it's fine. So I really liked what Harshita said, but I just wanted to mention one little thing, which is like, you made this comparison to marriage, but just wanted to reiterate one thing, that it's also possible to get out of it. Okay, like especially in some places, I know Switzerland, Europe, and I think also in England as well, where I have seen it, like relationships break down irreparably. So I have seen my friends who are like, yeah, I just cannot continue with this. Either the problem's not working out or my relationship is bad. It is it is possible that that happens. And that's why I had mentioned before that, clear these things out. Many people have mentioned it. Make sure you know where your boundaries are, and your boss also knows where your boundaries are, so that it doesn't happen. The thing that I wanted to sort of link up with the administrative question is that in France, Switzerland, I know at least that your visa situation makes it not completely tied to your boss, which I think is not the case for many other things. So if it happens that, look, things are not working out, I spent 2 years, I'm dropping out of the PhD, there is an option that you in France, you get directly a place like a resident. People in the US, it's very different. In Europe, you get a 3-month visa to come into the country, and then you apply for a residence card, which is a long-term thing. And you can use that to stay and look for something else, either a new PhD, or if you want to get out of academia, it's fine. It's a possibility. It's an option. It's not a compulsion that if you're in, you have to it's nice. I'm sure you're in because you're motivated to do science. But if things irreparably break down with your boss, there's a possibility of getting out. Just wanted to get it out there, even if it doesn't work out. And as for this question, administrative stuff, it isn't as easy as possible as you think it might be. It's also very lab dependent. Tanmana has mentioned if you have a rich lab, it's good. That's true. I have worked in places which are like a privately funded body inside a university. In UCL in London, I was in the Welcome Center, which is a privately funded body inside a university. And I knew for a fact that I didn't have to care about all my admin stuff, all my ordering of materials and everything. I had a lab assistant who was doing everything. Other students, also UCL graduate students, also in London, but in a non-private associated lab, had to do a lot of things by themselves. In France, it's the same kind of, right now, I am in a academic lab, and there's a lot of things that I have to do. And I have friends who are in a place called the Paris Brain Institute, which is a private institute. And they are like, oh yeah, my HR applied for my visa extensions, applied for my this and that. I'm like, really? Okay. I didn't have to do that. I had to go and do my stuff. So yeah, it's also very lab dependent, how much thing that you have to do. The reimbursement culture exists here as well, that you pay for some stuff yourself and you wait to get reimbursed. I've seen a lot of people from friends in India who have issues with this. It's maybe a bit better, but it exists. You wait for months to get stuff that you paid for. So it exists. So yeah, the funding situation of your lab is something you need to sort of maybe think about if this is important to you.
Thank you, Sharbutanu. That was great to hear, but I think I fear in the interest of time, we'll have to stop now. Thank you for joining us. Hope our panel have answered your questions well. For any more queries, you can always reach out to our website, www.biologicallyspeaking.com. We'll also be releasing a resource booklet shortly with information from a broader pool of graduate students regarding their experience in graduate school that will also be available on our website. I have thoroughly enjoyed today's lively discussion. I'm sure the panelists have too. Please join me in thanking all the panelists. I know it's not possible to replicate the real life thundering applauses on Zoom, but at least we got the clapping hands emoji. Thank you, Ankona, Harshita, Arun, Pritesh, Shriya, Sharbutanu, Sijan, Tanmana, and Upola. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your journey and experiences through graduate school. I'm sure the audience appreciates it all the more. Once again, thank you to all of you who tuned in for this session. Please bear with us for a few minutes. Our next session with Dr. Devajyoti Chakraborty from CSIR IGIB will start shortly. Thank you.
Yeah. Are lights are there?